All right, let's talk about all things Malaysia. Okay, so first things first, I wanted to talk about the route that we took so that you guys know what places we went to and what places we didn't go to. So obviously if you're looking at visiting the east coast of Malaysia, we didn't go there. So this video probably won't help you that much, but we did spend a lot of time on the west coast and we went inland a little bit to Cameron Highlands, but I will start from the start. So we arrived in Singapore. And I say we when it wasn't actually us. I arrived in Singapore on my own and was ready to start the journey. I had initially organised with Yessa that we would actually meet up in Bangkok and I would do the first couple of months of the bike trip just by myself. And I was super excited for that, but I was also super nervous. And I'd never done anything like this before. I was practicing taking my bike apart, putting it back together with the help of my dad, who knew every little part on the bike, and I knew nothing about it. So I arrived in Singapore by myself with my bike box that I did manage to get on the flight, obviously, and then I caught a ridiculously expensive taxi because I was too worried about putting the bike together by myself and I didn't know where the hostel was, and I just felt really overwhelmed, especially after like a 13-hour flight. I was like, you know what, it's the beginning of your trip, just ease yourself into it. So I arrived at Tree Inn Lodge, and I will leave a link for their contact details below because they were an amazing hostel. The Australian dollar to the Singapore dollar is basically 1-to-1, so Singapore is not a cheap country when it comes to Asia. I arrived at Tree Inn Lodge and had my bike box along with me, and I was nervous as hell. I was so nervous. I was doing nervous poos like every 3 hours. I was like, what have I gotten myself into? I couldn't even put my bike together by myself. And here I was in another continent, all by myself, thinking, what the actual Anyway, the manager of Tree Inn Lodge helped me put my bike together along with another cyclist that was staying. Now, Tree Inn Lodge, I will mention, was like a semi-cyclist based hostel, so people usually start their trip in Singapore and they go north into Asia, or they're finishing their trip in Singapore. So there was a plethora of knowledge about cycling, especially how to get out of Singapore. We then got all of the directions from the manager at Tree Inn Lodge, and he guided us literally like turn left here, turn right here, and we managed to get our way all the way to the Malaysian crossing, where we lifted our bikes over into the motorbike lane and cycled through. We had no issues with the bikes crossing any of the borders for that matter. And yeah, we headed straight into Malaysia. At first we tried to walk our bikes through a shopping center or something. The security guard ended up kicking us out. We were saying that we were cycling and we don't know where to sleep tonight, and he said you should go to Ulu Cho. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, obviously, and that goes for the rest of the towns and places that we visited. Ulu Cho, Ulu Cho, Ulu. Anyway, from Ulu Cho we sort of kept heading north and we found our way towards Pontian. From Pontian we went to Malacca. Malacca, we actually went across to Indonesia for a couple of weeks, and then we went back to Malacca and stayed there because we were actually working there, and I'll do a separate video on Indonesia to explain how that situation happened. After Malacca we headed towards Cameron Highlands, and from Cameron Highlands we then went to Ipoh, Georgetown. Back from Georgetown we went to Jitra, and Jitra is probably like the last major town that we went to before we actually crossed over into the South Thai border. So that is going to give you a rough idea of where we went to. There was obviously tiny villages that we stayed at and wild camping that we did in between those main places, because we did not make it from Malacca to the Cameron Highlands in one day, obviously. But that will give you an idea of the direction that we went in. So I will get into what places we liked in Malaysia and what places we think you would enjoy, and what places we absolutely didn't like. Oh, oh. Just dropped tea all over myself. So I wanted to talk about some of our absolute favorite places in Malaysia. I want to say, first off, it was probably the first place we visited, which was the Chinese temple out at Ulu Cho. And this tiny little village had just little Chinese eateries. It was the first time that we had eaten the 3-minute Chinese egg. When we ordered it, we were like, yes, eggs on toast, like heaps of energy. Super surprised that they even had that in Malaysia, because I think we were expecting sort of those heavy meat and noodle breakfasts that we did have later on in our trip anyway. But we'd ordered eggs on toast and we thought, this is great. And the coffee in Malaysia is delicious. And I think the benefit of going to these smaller unknown places was the experiences that we had. No one spoke any English. You're pointing to a menu that was written in Chinese, and then there was a Malaysian version. And these eggs come out and they were not even cooked. Like, the eggs weren't cooked. They were totally runny. So you basically stir the eggs up, you add a bit of chili sauce, you add some salt and pepper, and then you dip the bread into it and use it almost like a dipping sauce or like a soup. It's like an raw egg soup. It's slightly cooked. Obviously they've been cooked for 3 minutes, hence 3-minute eggs. Anyway, we went there in the morning after we had had our first night wild camping, and that was an experience in itself. The temple was stunning and there was heaps of visitors because I think there was a festival on at the time, so there was incense smoke just like billowing out of this Chinese temple. The number 2 place I would say is Malacca. This place totally stole my heart. It is a little touristy, it is popular, it is a place that people go in Malaysia, but I think the added bonus of being able to stay there for 4 weeks really allowed us to get to know the city. And it does take a long time to get to know cities. You know, being in small villages, you see everything, you get a feel for the place, especially if there's no tourists around. That feeling sort of comes a lot quicker. But there's secrets in cities, there's hidden gems and hidden places, and I think being there for 4 weeks allowed us to really see it and really get to know it. Not just stay in the touristy areas, but we had access to our bicycles, so we were really able to branch out and see the outer suburbs and those outer regions of the city, which really sort of come to life, I guess. You know, I remember one night we'd cycled out to a night market, which Malaysia, like their night markets are everywhere for one, but delicious, and so much food. And we were sitting down and there was a kung fu film being projected up on the side of a brick building, and we were the only tourists there. So I think having a bicycle and being able to explore a city really allows it to come to life. So Malacca would definitely be my number 2 place that you have to go and get a bicycle, jump on a bicycle, go and see the city. And that goes for any city for that matter. Now, a really random one I would say is Pontian. And again, Pontian, I don't know, Pontian. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's southeast and it's a little coastal sort of city. And we were actually taken in by a random group of Malay cyclists who saw us cycling along the side of the road and allowed us to sleep in their clubhouse for the night. They took us out for dinner. The seafood was delicious. You can eat seeing the water. Apparently you can, on a clear day, you can see Thailand on the other side of the water as well. And it was just a fantastic little place, like a hidden gem. Again, we were the only tourists that we saw there, and that allowed for really cheap eating and really good experiences of what Malaysia really has to offer as a place. The last place I want to mention is Jitra, and again, we were taken in by someone, so you experience a place very differently, but there was a very eccentric inventor who spotted us on our bikes and had also done a bike trip going from Malaysia to London a couple of years before that, so really wanted to make us feel comfortable, give us a bed, give us a place to shower. He helped service our bikes and clean them because we'd been on the road for about 3 months, I think, at that point. So we fixed up the bikes before we headed into Thailand, but he took us to a massive market that they have there in Jitra. Amazing food, a massive combination of Malay food, but also Chinese food. And yeah, it was a unexpected place that really wowed us, I think. And I don't know if that totally came from the experience that we had with Timothy, our host, or the area or the market. We went to like an abandoned theme park, and that was quite interesting. It was really a different sort of an experience, and I think that's why it also makes my list of places that you should try out and try and go to as well. Now, I'm also going to tell you the 2 places, and I already did, but the 2 places that I probably wouldn't go to again, and Cameron Highlands is on there. I think it was really nice to escape from the heat, but I don't think I would go to Cameron Highlands again. It was expensive, and we weren't paying for our accommodation, but all of the food prices had basically doubled. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful and it was a nice place to enjoy, but it doesn't really stick out in my mind as a place that I would go back to. Again, with Georgetown, very expensive, nowhere to camp, super expensive food, and crowded hostels because we had to be there for visas. Well, we thought we had to be there for visas, and turns out we didn't have to be there for visas because we couldn't organise them anyway. Georgetown and Cameron Highlands, beautiful places, but okay, so in this next section I wanted to talk about how we found places to sleep, and this was different in every country. And in Malaysia, in the beginning, it felt kind of exciting but scary at the same time. It was definitely new to us. I certainly hadn't freedom camped in an Asian country before, but once we got the hang of it, once we got our routine like down pat, then it really just felt like a flow. It just felt like a part of the day, and we got better at finding locations. A typical routine would be that we would cycle, we would stop somewhere for lunch, charge all of our devices, and then we would cycle to a town that we had in mind. We would stop and have dinner. After dinner, we would then find a petrol station on the outskirts of town, and we would stop and use the bum gun or the taps to wash ourselves down, grab some snacks, maybe some water or treats for the night if we felt like we had deserved it. And then we would just cycle out of town, still a little bit damp, which was actually like the most refreshing part of the day because you were like cooling down. The air temperature had dropped a lot over the day from the day's heat. We would cycle out of town, and then just as it started to go dark, then we would think, okay, let's start looking for a place to sleep. So we would try and set up the tent. There was a lot of palm oil plantations that we slept in. We had also slept in a rubber plantation, but I will say in a rubber plantation in the fields there, they actually work at nighttime. So we only did that once, and we had slept out the back of petrol stations if we didn't really feel like moving on for the night. Some of them had big land out the back, some of them just had small areas, so we only did that a handful of times when we couldn't be bothered cycling out of town and risking not finding anywhere. We slept in some really random places and some really beautiful places, and not at all did I ever feel unsafe or scared or anything like that. So setting up the tent at nighttime gave us the security that we felt like we hadn't really been seen by anyone. Now, if we weren't camping, we were either working for our accommodation, which also meant that we didn't have to pay, but more often than not, and especially in Malaysia, people would see that we were cycling and offer us places to stay. Do you have a place to stay? Do you have food? Are you hungry? Like, we had people forcing us like to eat with them and to go to their restaurants and meet their families and all of these experiences. And I think being on the back of a bike really opened us up to those opportunities, and some of the most humbling experiences we had were in the living rooms of families that wanted to try and pick your brain and learn everything about you even though they didn't speak English. So those experiences were amazing. So if we weren't camping and we weren't working for our accommodation, more often than not we were actually staying, you know, with people and with friends that we had made and people that we had met that wanted us to stay with them and their families. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the food that we ate in Malaysia, and Malaysia has this beautiful mix of cultures. So there's a lot of Indian and Chinese migrants that they've had over the centuries, I guess, and they have very well established places in their culture. So that allows you to get curries and naan breads and rice and all of those things that come with Indian food. But then you've got a massive Chinese influence, so you can get noodles and sauces and marinated meats and tofu and all of those things. And then you've actually got the Malaysian food, which is sambal and all of those delicious spices, and again curries. And then you've got meals on top that like mix all of those things together. So the food culture in Malaysia was one of my favorites that we went to. You could have Indian for breakfast, Malaysian for lunch, and then Chinese for dinner. I do not remember at any point getting sick of the food or over it or feeling that we didn't have enough choices. There was too many choices and too many delicious things. The food is super, super cheap, and the coffee is, again, delicious. We would order, I think it was a coffee C, and each different type of coffee had another letter. So there would be coffee O and coffee C, and they all meant different things. And that was like one of our favorite things. So our only expense was probably food, and the two of us could probably eat for about $9 a day, Australian dollars, that is. So super, super cheap. We were spending on average $3 a meal, and then every now and then, and I really mean every now and then, we would get a beer or to end the day, or a Magnum ice cream. That was like one of our favorite treats. That was like the ultimate way to finish off the day. It would be like, have we deserved it today? Have we really earned this? And there was nothing better than sitting at the back of a petrol station after cycling 70 kilometers, just hoeing into a delicious Magnum, and then that was like day finished. It was like cherry on top. So it's the little things, I guess. Now in this section, I wanted to talk about how we managed to work for our accommodation in Malaysia. Now, the first job that we had was at Ringo's hostel in Malacca. It's incredibly close to the market, which was fantastic. We met amazing people there, and we had a really great community of long stays that were also working. Now I know that they are on the Workaway website. The cycling group that we met in Pontian actually know the owner of the hostel, and they had let us know that he was looking for people to work in the hostel. So we were actually able to contact the manager owner directly, as well as the cycling club that we met in Pontian were able to contact him and say, we've got cycling friends that are coming up and would love to work for you. So we stayed there for 2 weeks. We left and went to Indonesia for a 2-week loop, and then we caught the ferry back to Malacca and stayed and worked there for another 2 weeks on top of it. So I think all up, again, we were in Malacca for 4 weeks, and we worked for our accommodation the whole time. The second time we worked for our accommodation was in Cameron Highlands. And again, I had directly contacted the hostel to see if it was possible before we left. And Cameron Highlands was a last minute addition to our trip. I don't think we initially wanted to go there because it is touristy and expensive, but I had said, look, if we can work for our accommodation, that obviously, you know, subsidizes the amount of money that we would be giving out on food and things like that. But it's a minimum of 2 weeks. Most of the places that you ask to work would require a minimum amount of time. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 1 week. This place was 2 weeks, so we had committed to going to Cameron Highlands for 2 weeks. Now, the last little bit that I wanted to talk to you about was the visas. Now, I can only speak from my own experience because I have an Australian visa. I don't have an Australian visa. I have an Australian passport, and my partner was traveling on his Dutch passport. We both were able to get 90 days on arrival, and that was free. So it's free 90 days on arrival. When we actually left Indonesia and then re-entered Malaysia, we got another 90 days. And not that we used it all, but if you are wanting to do a border run, there are so many countries in the area that you can duck across the border to, have a couple of weeks, not even a couple of weeks, you could probably just go over for a couple of days and then come back and you'll be re-granted the 90 days. I'm not entirely sure how often you can do that within a 12-month period. The other visa that we were trying to organise was a longer time in Thailand so that we didn't have to get out of the country within 30 days. The type of visa that we were trying to organise and the embassy that we went to in Georgetown wouldn't allow us to do it without an organisation or without paying an organisation to say that you were as part of a tour or something like that at the time. This was quite a few years ago, so it might be different now. We had decided to actually we didn't want to give out the money on the extra visa and give money to an organisation to vouch for us. So we actually just rerouted our trip and decided to go to Myanmar, make it across to Myanmar within the first 30 days, have time in Myanmar another month, and then use a second entry visa for another 30 days on arrival for free. A lot of the visas that we had were for free. Most of them can be organised for free and don't need to be organised by an organisation. Okay guys, so that was it from me about all things Malaysia. Hopefully you have learned something and hopefully you feel like you want to go to Malaysia, because I would go back in a heartbeat. It was one of my favourite countries, and still thinking about the food, oh my God, it just makes my mouth water in a not gross way.